Okay, in this next section, we'll be taking a closer look at the comprehensive needs assessment process. So what is a comprehensive needs assessment? Well, at its most basic, it's a process or procedure that's used to identify and address factors between current outcomes and desired outcomes. And this process must include steps to provide clarity about the current situation and then identify what's needed to achieve the desired outcomes. It's a systemic process used to identify strengths and weaknesses within the context and constraints of the school and dig deeper into root causes. And root cause analysis is a critical part of the needs assessment process because it addresses the problem rather than the symptoms of the problem. And so the goal of the needs assessment is to help educators identify, understand, and prioritize the needs that a district or school must address in order to improve student outcomes. And this process leads to the development of a plan to improve student outcomes. So it's important to note that a needs assessment is not an isolated tool. It's really the first step in the continuous improvement cycle, which includes understanding root causes that contribute to the prioritized needs, then selecting evidence-based interventions to address those needs, preparing for and implementing those interventions, and then evaluating whether or not the interventions are working in addressing the identified needs. And so the needs assessment is the foundation of the school plan. And all strategies and actions should be informed by and aligned with the data, which will lead to aligned acts of school improvement rather than random acts. So there's not one correct way to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. And again, it's important to keep in mind that the needs assessment is a process. And so one resource that we'd like to highlight that includes a needs assessment process is the State Support Network Needs Assessment Guidebook, and we've included the link to this resource on the slide. This guidebook supports the development and facilitation of a needs assessment and lays out 5 key phases or steps to support the implementation of a needs assessment. And so these 5 steps include planning, collecting and organizing data, interpreting information, determining priorities, and connecting to implementation. The guidebook includes guiding questions and key considerations for each of the 5 steps. So the first phase or step involves planning the needs assessment. This step lays the groundwork for the rest of the needs assessment process. It involves defining the desired outcomes and then creating a plan to achieve them. And so some of the questions that you would want to consider during this step include, why are we engaging in this needs assessment? Who are the key educational partners? And how will they be engaged in the process and at what points? What will the needs assessment cover? And how will the results of the needs assessment be shared with educational partners? Step 2 is collecting and organizing data. And so data is a foundational component of the needs assessment process. And so as mentioned earlier, the comprehensive needs assessment must include an analysis of verifiable state data, consistent with all state priorities and informed by all indicators, including student performance against state-determined long-term goals. And schools may also include additional data used to measure student outcomes. So this step involves collecting various forms of data and organizing it in a way that is understandable and useful for the educational partners who will be involved in this process. And so some questions that you may want to consider include, what data is readily available from existing sources? What additional data is needed? And what are the best ways to collect this data? And how will the data be presented so that it's clear and understandable for educational partners? The next step is interpreting information. And during this step, educational partners examine data to draw conclusions, identify trends, and begin to identify improvement needs. And so some things that you'll want to consider during this step include, what does the data reveal? What are the strengths and challenges of the current school program? Were there any themes or trends that emerged from the analysis of the data? And how can we articulate what we've learned from the data analysis without casting blame? So through the needs assessment process, it's likely that multiple needs or concerns will emerge. And so this step involves prioritizing those needs so that improvement efforts are directed towards a manageable set of priorities, as well as those that will have the greatest impact for students. And so some questions that you may want to consider during this step include, what findings or themes have emerged that, if addressed, will have the greatest impact on student outcomes? And how many priorities can the school realistically address at one time? And is there any additional data that is needed to make informed decisions about priorities? So the final step of the needs assessment process takes the results and turns those results into something actionable. In this step, educational partners dig deeper to understand root causes of prioritized needs so that they can be connected to the relevant goals. The process of understanding the root causes of prioritized needs also informs the selection of appropriate evidence-based interventions to address those needs. And so some questions you'll want to consider include, what are the potential underlying root causes of the prioritized needs? And how will the school connect the needs assessment results to the selection of evidence-based interventions? So in order to support schools with the needs assessment process, district leaders will need to determine what level of support is needed. And it's very likely that schools will be in different places and need different levels of support. And so here are just a few examples of how districts could support schools with this process. So first, just ensuring that schools understand what the comprehensive needs assessment is and its purpose. Also, training school administrators and school site councils on how to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. And supporting school administrators and school site councils in understanding the dashboard, data analysis, and how to conduct a root cause analysis. Per the Code of Federal Regulations, schools must document how the needs assessment was conducted, the results it obtained, and the conclusions it drew from those results. And so schools can include a description of their needs assessment process and the results within the SIPSA or in a separate document. If your LEA or school uses the CDE SIPSA templates, it includes a comprehensive needs assessment section to document this process and the results. If your LEA or school uses a locally developed SIPSA template that does not include a section to document the comprehensive needs assessment process and the results, then it will be important that you maintain documentation of this process and your findings. And so as a resource, we've included a comprehensive needs assessment summary tool that could be used to help document this process and the results. And so again, the comprehensive needs assessment is not a thing or a document, but rather a process. So this document or resource, it's not a needs assessment, but rather a tool that you can use to document your process and the findings. Also, for your reference, we've included a link to the CDE's Continuous Improvement Resources webpage, which includes links to several tools and resources to support LEAs in schools with the Comprehensive Needs Assessment.